Hi, and welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time podcast. My name is Jody Stapler. I'm an owner of a publishing company called Willow Moon Publishing, a podcaster, a voiceover artist, and an author. Stories are so important in our lives, and there are so many out there from independent authors and independent publishing companies that we may never find unless we trip over them on accident. So I started this podcast for people who love books and love to read, and to help bring more awareness to the indie books and authors of our time. So stay with me for So Many Books, So Little Time. I am speaking with Ed Aymar today. He is a columnist for the Washington Independent Review of Books. He's also the managing editor of The Thrill Begins, which is the International Thriller. Oh, say it for me. International Thrillers.
Writers.
Writers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Magazine. And also, you also do this thing down in Washington, something Noir. Let me look again.
Yeah, the DC Noir at the bar.
There you go. There you go. But, of course, we are speaking with you today about your novel, The Unrepentant. So thank you for joining me today.
No, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, everybody always wants to say International Thriller Writers of America, which I want to as well, but that makes no sense. But I get
it. Exactly. Okay, so before we get started into the book, tell us more about yourself. When did you get into writing in this crazy world of being an author and all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I always wanted to write, and like a lot of writers in school, I had teachers who encouraged me to pursue it, and most of those teachers were teachers in every class I had but English. They all said, this is not the subject for you. You really should just spend your time writing. And that continued to the point where I was a psychology major in college, failed out, and the school grudgingly let me back in, but only if I switched my major to English.
Wow.
Anything, but I picked English.
Yeah,
And
right.
Yeah, so that was in the 90s. And then after that, I was fortunate to go to a college that has a really good writing program and a great staff or faculty. So I ended up, just sort of going forward with it at that point. And then I think in 97 probably is when I started writing seriously, treating it as a day-to-day thing. And
yeah. Well, I would think that psychology, those classes that you were taking and delving deep into that actually helped a lot in your writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last class didn't, which was statistics. And that was that was a class that booted me out of the program. But yeah, no, that was my interest in psychology was really from a writer's perspective, and not necessarily from a scientific perspective.
Yeah.
And that wasn't something I quite understood until afterwards. But I was much more like, we would there would be equations or problems like, these two people have this, relationship and then this happens or this, and how does this affect that? And I was still thinking about their relationship. I think I was taking like the writer's view about why are they together and what's the deal and are they hiding stuff from each other and, everything of that nature.
Right. Well, and that's why I guess your characters are so well-rounded and so
thanks.
real. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But okay, so tell me a little bit about the column that you write in the Washington Independent Review of Books.
Yeah, so I've been doing that column for I think 4 years now, and it's a monthly column. And when my first book was published, I sort of thought I felt like I was going to walk out of a cave like Moses with commandments, and everyone would gather around at my feet and say, "Wow, what have you brought us?" And that didn't happen. There wasn't a big audience waiting. So I started writing other stuff, really just to bring attention to it, and realizing I needed to put a name for myself out there. And I wrote a column for the Washington Independent Review of Books, which I'd, read and been a fan of. And the editor asked if I wanted to write for them on a regular basis. And I jumped at the chance. And it's funny because I never thought of myself as prolific. And I never thought of
Yeah.
myself as an essayist, but it's fun. It's not something I'd want to do. I want to write fiction, but this is it's a nice way to flex muscles, sort of, that I wouldn't use otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they let me
Now,
write about anything I want, provided I can relate it to writing. So I've written about, different things happening in publishing and writing, but I've also written about, Filipino rappers and,
yeah.
grudgingly, try to find a way to relate that to writing. And they're like, okay, sure.
Yeah, right, right. Well, that says a lot for what they think of you and the respect they have for you and your writing. So, for sure. So have you always been into thrillers and crime and things like that? I mean, were those the books and the movies and things that you watched and read when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, for sure. Yeah, and really through high school and probably until I went into studying English in college. I read
Mm,
I read a lot of Alistair MacLean and David Morrell and guys like that with my dad. He was a big fan of that stuff, and I but when I started studying English, the college, as good as it was not friendly to genre and
mm,
genre. And
yeah,
so I that sort of I separated myself from that and began to just really read literary fiction. And then once I discovered writers like Megan Abbott, for example, who does such a wonderful job of writing crime fiction, and I realized there's really no boundary difference here.
yeah.
She's as good as any of the writers I read, and that gave me sort of the courage, I think, to return back to my roots and embrace them.
Yeah. Now, The Unrepentant is really your first novel, right?
Oh, actually, you know what? I've got to fix my website. It's my
Oh,
third.
third. Okay.
It's
Okay.
my
I was
third.
gonna
And
say,
yeah, so the
yeah.
first two were published by a different publisher, and my agent and I recently made the decision to get those rights reverted back to us and try and find a new
Good.
home for them. It wasn't anything against that publisher. There's no
Right.
aspersions there or anything. It's just we thought they could be doing better somewhere else. And I mean, they were my first, one was my first novel. The second was okay. They were tied together though, and I I'm a tinker, and I'd love the chance to
Hmm.
go back and work on them and sort of reimagine them and find a
Yeah.
new home for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. So, do you know when you'll be putting those out for everybody again?
No, I have no idea. I've got
Yeah.
I I'm so I'm in the midst of talking to the Unrepentant, and I'm working on other stuff that I haven't had a chance to go back to it. But they were part of a trilogy, and I never finished the trilogy. And
Yeah.
people will ask me, how's the third, where can I get the third book? And I'm like, I'm not sure. I don't know where I can get it.
Right, 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 right. Well, good luck with that. I'm sure
Thank
all
you.
those people out there that have been reading this series are just dying for that third book. So hopefully
Hopefully,
that'll
yeah.
come out within the next 10 years. But I know how it is as for writers, they, have an idea, but it's hard to actually get down and sit down and do it with everything else you have. So let's talk about The Unrepentant.
Sure.
I can't even say that correctly without feeling like it's not right. Unrepentant or unrepentant. Um, those T's. This book is so dark and it brings of course awareness to the horrible situation in our world of sex trafficking. Where did you get this idea? How much research did you have to do? I mean, just tell me about it.
Well, yeah, it is a dark book, and I didn't want to write a book about sex trafficking, and I've sort of kind of, been wrestling with what it really is. And most of my work is the study of violence. So
Mm,
it sort of sprang from that. And when you look at violence the way I do, or when I was studying it, which is sort of from an unfriendly perspective, it wasn't something I embraced. You get to it as a form of wrongdoing. And when you do that, I think eventually you'll get to the violence done, uh, upon a woman. And
mm,
that tied in with a mix I had. I was at a reading and somebody read a story about a prostitute, and it was very much sort of the happy hooker kind of take on it, the pretty woman take. And I
yeah.
just wanted to explore that. It didn't feel right to me. So so those dovetailed into the Unrepentant. But for the research, I spoke with a lot of people with different organizations, who were everything from helping victims of abuse and violence to anti-sex trafficking work to people who have just studied and written about the issue. And the romantic thing would be like, oh, I walked down the dark streets and talked to people. I didn't do that. All
Yeah,
of my
yeah.
conversations were on the phone, but it, they were. I was worried because I'm not. I haven't done a lot of research like this traditionally, and these were very sensitive topics. But everybody I
Mm,
spoke with was incredibly gracious and open, and all of my interviews turned into conversations, which was really
yeah,
helpful.
yeah. Well, it definitely makes you feel like Charlotte is a real person and
Thank you.
this is a real story. And it's hard for someone like me who always feels like we got to fix the world and save the world. And that's my brain just, oh, I can't even watch the news anymore because it just disturbs me too much. This sat
I'm
with
with you.
me for sure. Yeah. It sat with me and the characters stayed with me for a long time after reading it. It was hard for me to be like, okay, it's not real. I mean, even though it is real out there, I have to block it, and this was, it's a great read, but
No, thank you.
it hits you. Yeah. It hits you if you're, someone who's really emotionally into, fixing the world, I guess.
Yeah, and there was, one of the things that worries me a bit, and really the reason, that I sort of shy away from pushing it as a novel about sex trafficking is, one of the
Right.
women I spoke with an organization, to help women who've come from prostitution. She, I asked her if she'd consider blurbing the book. We had a great conversation, and she said, "Sure, send it to me." So I did, and she read it, and she wrote back a really nice email that she liked the book and found it compelling, but she couldn't blurb it. And I asked her why, and she said, it's not the kind of book I can endorse. I can't give this to
Right.
women I work with and tell them, this, that I see this as a good resource for them. And I think that's totally fair.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's not meant for that, but I wanted to do my best as well uh, to be sensitive to readers are, who are dealing with violence or sexual violence in their life. That's something I really always want to make sure that I'm conscious, to, as a crime fiction writer.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a sensitive subject, and it's one of those things where, people that have dealt with it or are triggered by things like that need to know that this is not the book for them. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But I mean, it's not just about that either. I mean, Charlotte meets a man who actually saves her in the beginning. His name is Mace. And of course,
Hmm.
he has his own back history. He has his
Yeah.
own things he's dealing with. Um, and I think that's what's so great about this book is that the characters all have like you've created a major backstory for all of them. So they do feel like real people that you're actually reading like a true story.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. With Mace, it was, I didn't realize this till after the book was actually published. Mace has his own issues. He's dealing with a bit of PTSD, and he has a very uneasy relationship with violence, and one that a lot of the other characters in the book, don't. They feel a necessity towards it, and are in the process of justifying it to different extents. But with Mace, the thing I didn't realize is that he's running emotionally while Charlotte's running physically. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a tie the two of them had, and I could never quite figure it out, like but I think that's it. That's their bond and what they recognize in each other.
Yeah.
Is that they're running and neither of them can run anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and one thing that I do really like about this book is that in those parts, in those moments where it's you're dark and you lighten the mood with this like dark sense of humor, wit that kind of, it just makes it a little bit easier to take everything, which is just an awesome way to write the book.
Yeah, there's always room for a good dick joke, right? There's
Yeah,
no, that's I hope you can swear on me.
yeah, no,
But
you're
no.
fine.
Yeah, no, I wanted to, that was something else, I really, so I like to write here. I see this, as like a sort of a dark canvas, but one where light streaks through, and I think
Yeah,
it's important to have that, because otherwise it's not readable, if you don't have that, if you don't have those moments. So Mace, in addition to sort of being, I think, an audience surrogate in a bit to the events in the book, is also the humor. He adds the humor and the relief, which I think is really necessary. I really
yeah,
admired, actually, Roseanne back in the days, like when it was
yeah,
first on in the 80s or 90s, and they had these, really complicated situations on that TV show. And then all of a sudden they'd have a joke that just sort of made everything
right.
a little less heavy. And
Yeah.
I love how they did that. And I think it was partly her and partly Josh Whedon, who was working on the show back then as a writer. You see that a lot in his works.
Yeah.
Sudden jokes
Well,
to,
it definitely, yeah, your book definitely does that. Yeah.
oh, good, good. Yeah. It's also the kind of thing you have to be careful of, because you don't want to tell jokes during I wanted to approach the book from the beginning sort of in that light tone, but
Yeah.
it didn't fit, and you realize, like, you really have to, some of the stuff you have to let play as it is. And
Right.
you can't break it right then. You can't break the
Yeah.
tension.
Well,
That
and
was a
we
hard
all
thing to
know
figure out.
people. Yeah, we all know people like that too, that when you're in sort of a situation where everything's angry or sad, that they have to crack a joke. It's just their way to deal with situations. So it was real.
Yeah, and it's also something that's important in my life. It's I think, with my wife, we have a good balance at that, where one of us is stressed or, sort of burdened by stuff, then the other can laugh, joke us out of it. And
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good thing. I think most of the friendships or relationships or, marriages I've seen that have been really successful have that nice balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I there was no, for me, I wanted a resolution at the end.
Hmm.
Um, because I always want that clear, cleaned up, little tight with a bow and it's done and we're done with it. Or I want it to go on to a series. So do you see any kind of series in this future with these characters?
I thought about that. I really thought about, at the end of the book, leaving. Well, I like to leave some things open in case I want to do that, in case these characters end up sticking with me in ways I didn't realize, and I want to continue their stories. But well, for one thing, I sort of feel like Charlotte, she needs a break. she's,
Yeah.
she's been
Yeah.
through a lot, and all the
Right.
characters in the book have. But I did want there to be uh, and an approach to it where maybe Charlotte um, was searching for Sophia's mother in the next
Hmm.
book, because I wanted that to be, I really, and I still do really like that idea, because that takes what happened to Sophie, or her death, like it really humanizes Charlotte in that, to do that, to have her never settled with that, that
Yeah.
she's not that callous or cold blooded, and it gives her a bit of humanity. Um, so I thought about that as something that could do, but I don't know. I think the world of the book I'll probably continue, but the
Hmm.
characters themselves, I'm not sure. Maybe they'll make appearances in
Right.
other stuff. I do that a lot.
Yeah.
It's hard for
Yeah.
me to leave that world.
Right. I bet. Like, how long did it take you to write this book?
Probably about I'd say total like a year and a half going through edits. I
Yeah.
mean, the first the first versions, the first I can do not quickly, but it doesn't, not like in a couple of months or anything, but I can go through them pretty fast. But like I said earlier, I'm a tinkerer, and I could go through drafts of books for anytime I get a draft back, edits back from the publisher or from my agent or whatever. I'm going to make their changes, and then I'm going to make other changes. It's
Yeah. Well,
hard for me
when do
to.
you make yourself stop? Because that could just go on and on and on.
Yeah, there's a point where I'm sort of, I feel like with this book, I felt like, okay, you know what, it's done and it feels good, and I still like it. And that was
Yeah.
very rare for me, because I usually hate
Okay.
everything I write afterwards. And
Wow.
this, this felt done. I felt like the sentences all had said what they needed. And yeah, it was
Yeah.
exhausting, but I felt like I knew inside when it was ready.
Yeah. Well, it's getting great reviews. Everybody's loving to read it. I loved reading it. Like I said, even though it's dark and it's stuck with me, it's one of it's one of those books where you can't put it down, that you need to finish it. And it's an awesome book. So I'm so
Yeah,
glad that you
thank
wrote
you.
it. Yes.
Thank
And
I really
where,
It means a lot to me. Thank you.
yeah, oh, good. Yeah. When you publish something, do you go out and look for like the reviews and see what people are thinking about it?
um, so yeah, I do. I mean, I do, but
Yeah.
I get very nervous reading. Here's the weird thing. I get really nervous reading good reviews. And so
Hmm.
some of the reviews I knew were good because I was tagged in them, or somebody wrote me and said, "Wow, you got it. This is terrific." And so what I do is I send them to my wife, and I ask her to
Okay.
read it. And it's sort of
That's
like
funny.
if it's sort of like me peering through like my fingers. I,
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, I should. I'd much rather read good reviews than bad
Right.
reviews, but I just feel I'm getting better at it. But
Yeah.
I was giving a talk about the book to a college class, at one of my old, at my alma mater, and the teacher introduced me with these really nice things, and it went on for a couple of minutes, and it was lovely, right? I would never,
Yeah.
it was all I could ask for. I felt like I was like shriveling up like a worm in the sun. I was just like, oh my gosh, please don't say anything else about how you
Right,
like the
right.
book.
Wow,
you know,
wow.
I'm getting
Yeah,
better at that, but
yeah,
it just makes me very awkward.
right. Well, you're definitely going to have to get much better at that because I think you're going to have a long haul of it. So,
Well, that'd be great.
something you want to work on. Yeah.
I'm
Where can
fine with
people
that.
find, well, I'm sure, and I can't wait to see it all. So, where can people find the Unrepentant?
So you can find it's a number of smaller bookstores are carrying it. It may be in some, if you're in this area, it might be at a Barnes and Noble or two in the DC vicinity, which is where I live and work. But you can also find it online at any of the online booksellers, IndieBound, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo probably. And then you can always find information about it on my site,
Okay.
eaymar.com.
Okay. And can they find you on any other kind of social media?
Yeah, I'm everywhere, and it's at Aymar. So
Okay.
Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm a little too old to do Snapchat. It makes me feel creepy,
Right.
but but I have an account. I just never check it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of new ones coming out. My kids play with a new one called TikTok or something.
Oh, I don't even
I
know
think
that
that's
one.
like the new Snapchat. Honestly, I think it's like the new Snapchat. I don't know, but it's definitely I'm way too old for it. So
Yeah, I got no idea.
But anyway, so I want to thank you for being with me today and for letting me read your book. It was an incredible read and so realistic, but and I do want to see those characters again. So please put them in some other books. But yeah, so do you have any book signings or anything like that? Anybody can check you out, come meet
Uh,
you.
yeah, I'm doing one Thursday at Baltimore at the Dashiell Hammett Society. It's with two writers, Angie Kim and Nick Corpon, and then I'll be locally at a number of different events. The big one that I'm excited about is the Gaithersburg Book Festival in Gaithersburg, Maryland. It's a wonderful event. They do a terrific job. They have I think it's in May, and I can't remember the exact date, May 20th maybe, but I'll be there, and I'll be at the Washington Writers Conference, which is I think a week or two earlier. And it's the Washington Independent Review of Books conference. I'll be there, and I'm
Okay,
moderating a panel actually with Jeffrey Deaver. Um,
very cool.
yeah, that'll be fun. So yeah, a
Yeah.
couple of
So can
Malice
people find
Domestics and
out
other
about
ones.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, people can find
Just
out about that on your website.
Yeah, just go to my site and under events, everything's there with links and everything else.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this, and thanks for the lovely things you said. This is really nice.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to thank Ed Aymar for joining me today and telling me all about his life, his career, and his new novel, The Unrepentant. And I want to thank you for joining me on So Many Books, So Little Time. Let me know what books you're reading, what authors I should interview, and give me your suggestions and comments. If you appreciate our podcasts, books, music, and our goal of helping others fulfill their artistic career dreams, and would like to see it continue for many years to come, please join our Patreon and become a sponsor at Willow Moon Publishing. Make sure you subscribe to So Many Books, So Little Time podcast so that others can find me and all the great indie books and authors that I'll be sharing throughout this podcast. You can join me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at So Many Books, So Little Time podcast. And you can check my website out at jodystapler.com or email us at somanybookspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for joining me, and come back next week when we delve into another story.